Welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast with Zach Palmer, the show where we explore the strategies, insights, and stories that empower you to grow your business, strengthen your relationships, and elevate your health. Because growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Lysle Wickersham. Lysle is a uniquely right and left brain individual and brand capitalist to his core. He understands the power of branding and positioning along with the practical reality of operations, managing a P&L, and scaling a business to a liquidity event. He leverages a career in brand development, investment banking, and management consulting, refining his craft over a 30-year career. As managing director and chief creative officer, Lysle built and sold a $170 million integrated agency where he positioned and built many world-class brands. He went on to work in several tech startups and founded an investment banking and M&A firm. All of these explain BrandThink's holistic and integrated approach to value creation. Let's dive in and take another step on your growth, to your journey to perpetual growth. Lysle, welcome. I'm super excited to have you here today, getting tongue-tied too.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Zach. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, excellent. I'm super excited to have you. If you would, I always like to start out. If you would just provide our listeners with a little bit of your story history. Where did you start in business? What were some of the major turning points, life events, the challenges, the successes that brought you to where you are today, and what are you up to now?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. If you want to go into detail somewhere, you let me know. But
Yeah.
for me, the journey's been always about change, always about learning, and always about growth. And so there's been a lot of pivots along the way, which I think always makes a career path exciting. I grew up as a creative in integrated communications and advertising, and was fortunate enough to be part of building an agency from about 2 people to about 120 people that was sold a couple of times. Last time it was sold to a French company, Havas. And that was a great run. And I watched that get pulled away from me in a public company, which was another incredible experience to see a company you spent a decade building get consolidated without your ability to change any of that. Once things are public, the game changed. But I think the beauty of that is it gave me a chance to move in another direction, which I did. I had the opportunity to run a couple of tech startups through a venture capital colleague that I knew. And that got me interested in the whole value creation and scaling business side of the world, which was different than what I was doing before. But for me, there was a inherent and natural connection between the creative side of building equity in brands and the strategic side of scaling businesses. There's a natural connection there. And that led me to founding an investment bank, which cut my teeth in a whole nother direction. Which is an awesome pivot. And for some reason, both hemispheres of my brain seem to work together and have found a way to marry those two paths into a consulting company that I run now in New York. And so it's been a good fit.
That's a beautiful gift. Fascinating. I mean, there's so many different things I would love to explore here. You said, what was the one thing that I caught on to was, and I'm just curious how you might explain some of the challenges that you were going through. I mean, so there's 2 questions. One was, as you were going through these life transitions, the turning points, the pivots, moving into a new venture, did you ever have the feelings like it was the question coming up, what do I really want to be when I grow up? Or was it more of just an organic transition? This thing popped up and you just leaned in and said, heck yes. Or how did that come about? But before I forget the question, you talked about the company going public, and the underlying message I heard is it's not necessarily the environment that you want to be in. And I would love to have you expand on whether or not that was a hallucination or an actual observation, and what some of the differences are in terms of running a private versus public company. So first things first.
Yeah, let me start with that one, because that is an interesting journey. And back in the days when I was in the agency business, mergers and acquisitions were a big part of how holding companies scaled. And so there was always a lot of activity. And I had been through that acquisition thing a number of times in other agencies. And then getting to a point where the company was sold the first time to a public entity was just really exciting. And I didn't really think a lot about the loss of control or the implications of that. Um, you just kind of roll with it. And it was only a period of time before the company that had acquired us and Arnold Worldwide at the same time uh, ran into trouble and took 16 companies and consolidated them into four. So I woke up one morning and they said, Lyle, your company is folding into this company and you don't exist anymore. That was after, a decade of building a business. So that's when it kind of hits you in the face. You go, geez, I have no control over this. And this is happening whether I like it or not. And then, there's an adjustment period. But, I know it's a cliche, but one door closes and another door opens, and that is kind of what happened. I had a colleague in the space that said, "Hey, you want to do this?" And did I take a calculated decision about, where is my career path going? I really didn't do that. I just kind of responded to a new opportunity and said, so much of the work that I had been doing was figuring out how to position businesses to grow. And the idea of doing this for a startup really intrigued me. And I had a group of really talented people that I was able to bring with me. So I didn't think twice, Zach. I just jumped into a whole new direction. So maybe I should have been more thoughtful about that path, but I didn't really worry about it.
No, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that too. I mean, the reality is, I think more often than not, people are hit with opportunities more often than they realize. It's just we get so stuck in the patterns, the stories, the fears that instead of leaning into it, you run away from it, and it could have been one of the most transformative experiences of our life. So we've got to keep an open mind when those things come along, because the reality is, particularly in business, things are going to change, and it's either something you want to be a part of, you don't want to be a part of, and sometimes the choice is made for you. So having the wherewithal to stay flexible and really go where, God, the universe, whatever your particular belief system is, starts to guide you. As long as we're paying attention to those invitations, there's a lot of great good that can come from that. I'm curious because typically, one thing my listeners have probably heard me say 1,000 times is, in business, new level, new devil. And, just very simplistic, high level look. It's like, what it takes to get a business to its first $100,000 versus to $1 million versus to 3 to 5 and 10 and 20 and 100 and beyond, all require different mindsets. And you've done that very successfully, from startup to massive organization. That requires a unique talent, mindset, gift. And one thing I heard you say was you were very good at surrounding yourself with the right people. But I would love to have you expand on that journey, because I have not met many people that have the intellectual capacity as well as the skill set to be able to navigate all of those different stages of business. Generally, we're kind of good at one or the other, startup and inception, early stages of growth, scaling, or, ultimately taking it to a whole nother level. I'm not even sure how to frame the question better than that. How do you look at that business growth journey, consult with other companies, know when somebody else should be stepping into leadership roles and maybe the owner should be taking a step back, or you might need a new CEO to guide through the next level of challenges or growth? It seems like there's a lot to that. Could you elaborate on that?
There's a lot of questions in all that, Zach. And building any company, I think, regardless of size, requires the same kind of thought process. And whether you have 10 people or 100 people, it really requires having a clear understanding of the business's purpose, its value proposition, what it stands for, what it means. Because first and foremost, you're creating a group of people to help take you there. And so, there has to be wisdom in that thinking. And that's fundamentally how you build a brand. And your first constituent to be successful in the marketplace is your employees, is your people.
Yeah.
So one of the things that unified us as an agency was people believed in our purpose and our positioning and wanted to be a part of doing that. And yeah, there's market dynamics and you got to be able to do sales and make revenue and all the basics, but having everybody aligned, I think is probably one of the most important things that you can do.
Mhm.
And so that to me is not an issue of how big the company is.
Mhm.
Um, it has to be done regardless of what size.
Mhm. That's interesting. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I know that small businesses are the overwhelming majority of businesses in the United States. And I think a lot of people get into business because, they're looking for time freedom, and maybe it's an opportunity to pursue their passion, take a little bit more ownership and control over their life. But it's some of those nuances that you mentioned that may sound trite to the listeners, but are nonetheless true about we have to have a clear and present purpose, a vision, a mission. What are we trying to accomplish? Who are we trying to accomplish it for? What
Mhm.
is the real problem that we are solving? Because I think it's easy to get into business and start doing a lot of stuff and things, but without that underlying inspiration, the purpose, the core why behind it, the emotional driver, you're not going to be able to survive, or at least have the desire to survive those storms. And to your point, I love what you said about it. It's also creating unity. It's getting all the people
Mhm.
rowing in unison the same direction,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
extremely powerful. It's the difference between just having a job that you show up to and showing up to a career that's fulfilling your purpose. So,
True.
when there's the core elements. I mean, there's clarity on the business, the product, the service. As that pertains to building the team, what were some of the values maybe that you looked for when you're hiring individuals to ensure that you're getting people that are showing up for the right reasons that are going to be able to propel it to the next level?
I'm not sure you can put the onus on the person you're hiring to have that. It's a leadership
Mm-hmm.
question more than
Mm-hmm.
anything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's up to leadership to make sure they're building the right environment, communicating in a way that brings people together and creates the alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the broad answer to a lot of this is really about what does it take to build value, right? So in private equity, you acquire businesses, and the job is to drive value creation so that business is worth more, and you flip it and you make money, right? That's the game. So um, to do that, because I come from the creative side first, I understand the emotional attributes that come with building value, building financial value, stuff that's typically not measurable or easy to put on a P&L, but attributes that are the drivers for customer loyalty, long-term success in the market, preference, loyalty, all these things that create financial value. So understanding the emotional side of business means that I understand how to emotionally connect with people, and I can emotionally connect with the marketplace. And so when you build brands, you're recognizing that every brand has a rational component and an emotional component, and that people make emotional decisions. And if you wrap all that pragmatic side of physically how do you run a business with the understanding of the emotional side, and that connects with your people, that connects with the market, that kind of binds everything together.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's the lens that unifies both employees, unifies people in the market, and brings everybody together. So in that emotional, intangible side of business is the component that's most often lost in many businesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, really it is. I mean, I've witnessed that myself so many times. I mean, and particularly it's and I hate the word balance, but I mean, to me, it's like a metronome. or a ping pong match. I mean, we're constantly swinging in and out of range. And the whole thing is when we recognize that we're out of range or too overly focused on one thing, like as an example, you get too focused on the financials and the customer experience might begin to suffer, or even the internal client experience being your employees may begin to suffer. And then alternately, if you get too focused on the customer experience, you may lose sight of your financials. So we're constantly navigating an ever-changing landscape. And without that mindfulness to recognize the difference, do I need to be more focused on the art, the science, the human element, the emotional intelligence, all for what I'm gathering from you are what will lead to both a successful business and a highly established brand. And I think brand is it can be a term that's not overused, but people have
It's misused.
misused. Yes, thank you. Yeah, everybody has their own understanding, like we do have so many different words. And the idea the way I like to look at it is what helped me understand it best was thinking about myself and as a personal brand. What is my
Mhm.
personal brand with my friends, with my family, with my clients, with my employees? I mean, in any aspect of life, and being able to take that step back and reflect and really consider how I'm showing up and how people perceive me, and also being willing to have hard conversations and ask them for
Mhm,
transparency and
mhm, mhm,
have
mhm.
nothing on the table is a really powerful tool. But that same level of attention needs to go into building a business. So how, if you're, when you're consulting, what's your typical client? Do you have a particular a niche that you work within or tend to focus on? Or actually, I want to start with this question: is when you're evaluating a potential client, where do you go first?
Yeah.
Because I'm hearing the brand elements. There's a lot of stuff that sounds like
Yeah,
plays
there's a
into
good
it.
question. A lot of my work these days is with early stage and startup businesses, and
Hmm.
in a variety of verticals. I'm category agnostic, so I'm doing this kind of work in uh, consumer packaged goods, manufacturing, health and wellness, technology. So it's diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the core ingredient that's most important is that leadership or the founders or stakeholders that I'm working with understand the fundamentals of how you build equity. And at the end of the day, that's about how do you create financial value.
Mm-hmm.
And to build equity that turns into money, whether it's reduced cost of capital or a higher multiple when you transact a business, is based on alignment, which we talked about earlier. Are people all singing from the same song sheet? Do they understand what the business is all about? And that alignment is consistent over time. The longer you do that, the longer you remain consistent and own a position in the market, the more equity that you build.
Mm-hmm.
Right, over 40% of Apple's market capitalization is attributed to intangible equity, most of which is its brand value. Um, so if founders understand these principles, or the C-suite that I deal with get it, and they understand the value of that, then that's the first signal that this is a good relationship.
Mm-hmm.
If I struggle to get people to understand that, then it's always going to be a battle.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people don't get it, to
Mm-hmm.
be honest. Yeah.
What I'm curious about is there's a dichotomy in there, if not many. But one of the dichotomies in building a brand, at least as I'm thinking about as it pertains to a startup or early stage business, is you talk about the need for stability in terms of clarity in the direction, the value system, what they're trying to accomplish and why, how they're serving the clients, the problem they're solving. And we also know that we have to be flexible, fluid. One of my favorite sayings is be resolute in your outcomes, but flexible in your approach. And that could be relative to um, changes in the market, geographical changes, supply line. I mean, it could be one of countless things. So, how do you maintain? Um, how would you encourage an organization that is startup to early stage and about finding that balance between who they are and who they're serving and what their culture looks like internally and creating that certainty, so to speak, around it, while also having that flexibility and ability to pivot based on what the market needs at present without losing that identity? Or is that something that has to shift with it? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And, obviously consistency over time is what builds equity. If you have to pivot, ideally you have established a positioning for your company that gives you room to do that without having to fundamentally change the attributes of your brand. So if my core values of a business and my purpose and the way I express those emotional things in the market stay consistent, but I need to change an offering or introduce a new product or tweak my value proposition because of a competitive threat, then hopefully the umbrella attributes of my brand do not change. And that's somewhat responsibility of the development of the positioning in the beginning, that it's not so narrow that you don't have room to evolve as a brand. But you do want to try to get it fundamentally as right as possible from the beginning so you can have that kind of consistency. Look at the best brands in the world. They have not wavered from their position for a long, long time. And those people preempt anybody else from taking their space in the market. They dominate and they have long-term sustainable success. So if you make too dramatic of a pivot and change your core brand, you lose established equity that you've built over time. So that would be a huge risk.
What I'm curious about, and I don't even know if this is true, and I wish I had this post in front of me. I stumbled on this post sometime over the last week, and it brought up probably 7 or 8 of major brands that we would all know and identify with today, from your Pepsi to General Mills to, I think there was an aircraft manufacturer and so on. And the position statement behind it was showcasing that these companies had all started in completely different industries and positions that they're in, but now all of them have a very clear identity and are a name that we recognize and a brand that we resonate with. So I find that really interesting because, and this also might have been a parlance of the times, things have shifted now from maybe when they got started 50 to 100 years ago. But I find that really interesting because of, if that was even true, I didn't fact check anything. It's such a far cry from that notion. But what you're saying makes complete sense to me in every single context. It's like you deviate too far, you're going to lose customer trust, interest, management becomes a challenge. Have you ever heard of that, or any of those large companies having been started in a completely different space? Does that sound familiar at all?
Yeah, I think I've read early businesses that were one thing became something else, but at some point they put a stake in the ground and said, "This is who I am," and they stayed there, right? And they established that kind of equity that lasts forever. So I think that's more the rule than anything else. If you can be consistent over time and own your space and own your positioning and own your meaning, right? So Coke as a brand example is different than somebody that has specific attributes or feature and benefits kind of thing. It's a soda, right? But at the end of the day, Coke has meant, family, happiness, unity, that same concept, that emotional concept for a long, long time. So positioning doesn't always have to be around features and benefits or something rational. It can be around something emotional, and they've owned that emotional position forever. And it's considered one of the most valuable brands on the planet. If you got rid of everything and all their plants and all their hard assets, the brand would still be worth billions of dollars.
Right. So, yeah. Interesting. Do you, what I'm curious about, do you run into or end up working with, because consistency is the resounding theme that I'm hearing from you. Do you run into many ultra successful entrepreneurs that still suffer from shiny object syndrome? And is that a blessing or a curse if you do?
Not really. Most people understand that, shiny objects, take AI, for example, is a tool more than anything else. And so I don't see people tripping up over that so much. There will always be new tools and new ways to go about it. So, and whether you're an entrepreneur or a business, you have the same responsibility to figure out what is your positioning and what is your value proposition, and even the emotional attributes that you create for a brand have a capitalistic purpose. So if I'm a company, I'm trying to define my purpose and my cause. I've got to be able to make sure that those decisions resonate with my audience and that it resonates with their values and connects. And so, no, if you do that work right, shiny objects shouldn't get in the way. So
Interesting. How do you do that work effectively? I mean, you're working with a lot of startups, early stage, and it sounds like, I mean, we all know there's power in preparation. At the same time, we can prepare ourselves to where we never take an actual step forward. So where is that balance between doing the appropriate market research, really establishing the brand and identity, picking the problem, your particular solution, and maintaining that fluidity, I guess, because I'm curious how you would go about, is that something that you are doing from day one when you're working with a startup? You're like, hey, before we start producing anything, we have to have clarity on these, or is it you come in with an idea and then we start testing it in the market? Like, what does a little bit of that journey look like for you?
Sometimes you have to course correct with an early stage business who first starts out believing in an idea and a solution, and I've identified a pain point and I'm going to build a solution and everybody's going to want to buy it, and then suddenly you've got to take a step back and say, okay, well, I'm not just building a solution, I need to build a business. And so you step back and you say, all right, let's look at what I want to build, understand from a stakeholder perspective, what is the vision for what I want to build and where do I see this going. Now we look at the market opportunity, and is there space for this? Is there a place where this is scalable? And then you look at the competitive environment, say, is there white space competitively where I can be differentiated and be different and say something different and find a space that I can own and make my own? Those are the decision path that you go to establish core positioning. And that's all fundamental to how you define product market fit. Have you clearly identified your audience and their need, who they are, what resonates with them? All those things contribute to all the other attribute decisions you make for a brand, from your cause and your purpose to your personality, your tone and manner, all the things that define how you write about yourself, how you look, how you sound, all those intangible things that make the emotional part of the connection versus the here's my feature set and here's what I build and here's what it does for you. So all those things come together under really a capitalistic umbrella before a creative umbrella. Am I creating attributes that resonate with people so that I can build an emotional connection with them? And you do that because we're humans and we make emotional decisions. We don't just make rational decisions. You have 3 cars you want to buy. They all do 0 to 60 just like you want. They all have the same bells and whistles. At the end of the day, you buy the car that you love, that makes you feel good when you sit in it, that you like the badge.
We buy with emotion and rationalize with logic.
We do. And anybody who's built a brand knows that there's 2 sides to that coin. Brands have emotional side and rational sides, and you've got to identify and articulate them both. So
with some of the brands and companies you're working with, would you say that you are seeing a lot more, working with more organizations where it's a new product, a new service, a completely new technology or innovation, or is it something that is currently existing and they've just found a new innovative way to approach it? Maybe it's a different audience. What is the kind of divergence point between what you are seeing in the businesses you're working with?
There's a little bit of both. I think, I think about that question in the context of how do you raise money, right? Because something that is a paradigm shift or a genuine innovation requires a different kind of storytelling to investors than something that is in a very crowded space. That's often harder to create differentiation around, and it may not be a feature benefit differentiation. It may be an emotional differentiation. So it varies. there's no shortage of people out there with ideas and ambitions and wanting to build business and figuring out how to help these people position what they do, tell their story, put them in a position to go raise money is a incredibly satisfying experience.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I know that one of the challenges, if it does require a paradigm shift, can be whether or not you have the ability to weather the storm of the amount of education that it can take in terms of educating the public as to why this pivot is appropriate for them or this new way of looking at or approaching this product or service. Um, so I always find that very fascinating. I mean, anything business I love to discuss because
Yeah.
and just because you get so many different perspectives from so many different people. What is your core focus today? So, I mean, is it the private equity firm? And what are you guys working on currently? What are some of the things that you're most excited
Um,
about?
my primary focus these days is working mostly with early stage businesses, and I also am an executive mentor in a early stage accelerator group, which gives me a chance to give back a little bit and work with early stage people and try to teach some of these values. Um, but most of the stuff I'm doing now is crosses, as I mentioned earlier, a wide range of verticals. Some are paradigm shifting solutions in transportation, which has been a very difficult path to raising capital, which is ironic because it's such a staggeringly huge market. So you really can't predict these things.
Are you able to
But
speak to some of those? I'm curious about the
Well, I have
the
to.
transportation.
Yeah, some of it is I'm under non-disclosures.
Yeah,
I
I
can't. I
wanted.
can't. I can't
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
everything. But
Hmm.
but most of the people that I end up working with are people that have been struggling for a while
Hmm.
with what they want to do and haven't taken the time to do that foundational thinking that puts them in a position to tell their story well. So part of going back and saying, okay, let's figure out your core positioning and let's figure out all these attributes of the brand and how you differentiate so that we can put you in the position to tell your story in a way that's compelling. And investors have super short attention spans. So if you can't speak to your point of difference and the value proposition with brevity, clarity, super quickly, they're flipping to the next pitch deck and it's over. So and they're emotional people just like we are, and they make emotional decisions as well. So it's not just return on investment or multiple on invested capital that they're looking at. They want to be able to understand this story very quickly.
Hmm.
So that's part of where the art comes in. There's a pragmatic side of modeling the business and showing how it scales and grows. But how you tell that story, translates to how you're going to tell it in the market
Hmm. And where?
and,
Hmm.
and where. And so it's both an art and a science at the same time,
Hmm.
which is why this kind of work has captured me so much. Because it's both the creative side and the strategic side have to come together elegantly and seamlessly to tell that story
Hmm.
and get people engaged.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, it sound if I heard you correctly, like a lot of the clients that you're working with from the mentorship standpoint, I don't want to say skipped a step, but that might be the simplest way to look at it in that they have the idea for the product or service, but they miss, like you say, some of the underlying foundational work. I mean, they're so
mm,
excited to probably get that thing out that then we end up having to take a step back and able to, in order to be able to take those two steps forward. Is that, would you say that that's one of the most common problems of those that you mentor or opportunities, I guess you could say, or
um,
what are the things that most of these
mm,
challenges, what are the patterns that you're seeing that for our listeners that might be in the, startup or early stage of business might be able to start finding in themselves right now so that they can maybe nip some of those things in the bud sooner than later?
You do see that a lot, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're bootstrapping, they're pulling a team together, they're building an MVP, trying to get some validation and prove this idea. And then hopefully you can catch them at a point that says, "Oh, okay, you got something going here. Let's take a breath, make sure that we're figuring out that we actually have something that's differentiated, something that has a clearly defined space in the market, where you can grow and scale. Let's make sure that we can model it. Let's make sure all those pieces come together so that you can scale." So just building something and scaling into a profitable business are kind of two separate animals. One of the clients I'm working with, that's a SaaS company in the education space, wrestled with this for 4 years before we got engaged. And now we're at a very different place. We did that foundational work. We're modeling the business right now, and he'll go out and raise probably $5 million to finish the build.
And that's interesting too, because it comes back to clarity and consistency. And I think one of the biggest benefits that a lot of owners might overlook is the power of having a clear target. And we might not even realize it. I mean, you think you have it, but without asking the right questions, you'll never get the right answers. Without clarifying that direction and how this business strategy is going to impart not only in the short term, but in the long term, then you're setting yourself up unknowingly for roadblocks that you otherwise could have been avoided. And it simplifies the decision-making process.
Yeah.
Because if you can run it through the filters of mission, vision, values, the problem that we solve, who we solve it for, I mean, it just, you're less apt to run into maybe some of the shiny object syndrome and other challenges that would come out otherwise. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I can give you a good example of somebody who didn't think through things. Early stage startup had built a very interesting app that allowed people to aggregate family photos and families' histories and try to create communities and groups around those things, and raised an angel round and furiously spent almost all of that money trying to do the build without stepping back and saying, how are we going to go to market? How do we differentiate from other social environments that inherently can do a lot of the similar things? What makes our features different? Have we built the right feature set to find that competitive environment? And they brought me in way too late. We did that work, found out that they really weren't going to be able to compete with the feature set that they had built, and they ran out of money and they're gone. So they didn't do that fundamental business side of the thinking early enough, and therein lies the risk. So
yeah, that competitive landscape is super important to evaluate. I mean, it's the old adage, like if you build it, they will not come. Not in today's world. Not if it's not presented in the right way to attract the right people, those core audiences. Now I'm curious on a personal level. I know you're overall industry agnostic, but is there any of the verticals you're working within currently that you're finding exceptionally intriguing because maybe they're a new or burgeoning technology or product or service offer for that matter? Is there something where it's really lighting you up a little bit more because maybe it's a new set of challenges or new opportunities, or what's going on in that?
Yeah, I mean, I always will love the tech space, but I'm going to give you the terrible answer. The terrible answer is it doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah.
It's the nature of solving the problem and seeing the opportunity and figuring out what the hell can we do with this opportunity to make this thing really take off? And that's the buzz for me. And, I will always be a lifelong learner, and I love the brain food of the diversity of that kind of experience. So every time I'm talking to a new client in a new space, it's new energy and it's new learning. And I go into every one of these with no category biases, no confirmation biases, because I'm not locked into one category. So I can bring innovative thinking to everything that I do. And I want that diversification. Right now, I'm talking to people in the dating app world, SaaS and education, manufacturing and transportation. I have a client in health and wellness in the supplement space. It's really diverse, and for me, that's the brain food that gets me up in the morning. So.
Oh, I'm exactly the same way. I was that resonates with me on such a high level. I consult for businesses helping develop sales strategy, build and expand scale sales teams, turn around underperforming teams, toxic cultures, operational infrastructure, and so on. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, don't you need to have specific knowledge of this industry?" And I'm like, "No, it's the fundamental principles do not change as to what makes a sales strategy successful. Yes, there's going to be in different industry or product, service, market vertical, different communication strategy, different channels that we are initiating the sales process and conversations in. Yes, that stuff is going to change, but the fundamental principles that make it successful don't. And what I love, like you, is that diversity, because to me,
Yes.
it's exciting. I get to learn more about
Yes.
these other businesses and the impact that they are making, and then being a
Hmm.
part of that journey to help them
Hmm.
grow and scale is such a gift. So I
I will.
appreciate that.
I will say one thing about the tech space that's always so interesting is that
Mm.
it's so fast moving and it's so fragmented, and trying to figure out how to differentiate in incredibly cluttered environments is a really unique and interesting challenge. I mean, take AI, for example. This is a exploded and highly fractured ecosystem with so many people trying to still figure out, how do I position any kind of offering at all when in a world where people really don't know how to buy it even yet.
Or use it properly.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
strategic challenges are really interesting. And I know a lot of people who are very good at what they do, but they are struggling to be different and sound different and be heard, simply because of the clutter in the space right now. So.
Yeah, very, very true. And I mean, what better a point for somebody to reach out to a consultant like you where they can clarify that identity and messaging? Because without it, I mean, you're flying blind, literally. I mean, it's like one thing I frequently say: complexity is the enemy of execution. But without clarity, an absolute target, a direction that you're moving, you're at the victim of the environment. So
Yeah.
having that is really, really powerful.
Yeah, I have to pick your spot. I have to put a stake in the ground and own it. You have to decide what that is, and then stay true to it.
hmm I would
You
imagine
know.
AI for those reasons is challenging because of what I mentioned earlier, is a lot of what the market needs is education at this point in terms of what, not only what is AI, but how do I use it? How do I create it? How are other people creating it? What are the different usage protocols? Um, how do you explain it simply enough and create and also make the user experience simple enough that
Mhm.
people want to partake in it? And then to your point, there's countless different applications. I mean, my brain immediately goes to what wouldn't anticipate most people think of, but Elon and his robots, have a robot in every home by, I think it was 2040 or whatever he's shooting for. And, that's going to, I would presume, be run off artificial intelligence. And so there's countless different usage applications. And if you aren't really clear, back to the fundamentals, then it's going to make the entire process of reaching your market and making the impact that you want to have very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think anybody that's focusing on one specific physical deliverable in AI is going to struggle because it changes so fast,
Mm-hmm.
um, that it's hard to build and own a singular solution. So I think your positioning has to be around something that gives you room to grow, like we talked about earlier. If
Yeah.
you're too narrow in that positioning, and the space changes and the offerings changes, and 1 month later there's a different tool that does a better automation,
hmm
then you lose your value proposition. So
Yeah.
it's tricky in the tech space.
Yeah. I
So.
imagine that would be a really tough landscape to navigate. I mean, to your point, we're at the bottom of the bell curve of we're not cataclysmic, but geometric change.
Exponential growth.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, exactly.
it's a fascinating time. So
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think about that, this is the environment my parents grew up in to what I'm growing up in, to even just the different now with my kids. And I'm going, what they will see that we won't will be fascinating. Now, one last question for you, Lyle, and you may have already, in all likelihood, answered it, but if you had one tip for a startup, and this question is always the hardest question to answer, but if you had one tip for a startup or somebody that's in the early stages of business, one thing that they need, a question they need to ask themselves, a strategy that you would suggest that they look at or implement, what would be the one thing that would be the greatest predictor of their future success or failure if they were able to
mm,
do that?
yeah, for me, that's really not that hard a question to answer. To be a founder and to do a startup, and you got to have fortitude and guts and believe in yourself and take on something that is risky. It's not easy. So the one piece of advice I give is be smart enough to know that you need to have good people around you and build a network, have a support system, be a good listener, you know, understand that you may be good at your part, but there are other people good at other parts, and build a team, have a team, because one person and one solution doesn't make a business. So
Yeah, a book that really resonated with me this year, I'm curious if you read it, was the book Multipliers. And it was
yes, yes.
I loved their take on what it means to be a leader. And I mean, I reflecting on that throughout my growth journey and variety of different leadership and ownership roles. It is an evolution, and it's something you have to be constantly mindful and aware of. Um, and I don't know, but I've found that at least I found that more often than not, men are the ones that might be more likely to be stuck in a pseudo container, so to speak,
Mm.
because we're so often conditioned. You can figure it out on your own. You're smart. Do this thing, and sometimes those beliefs and value systems get so ingrained in your psychology that it can be hard to take a step back and realize that you will never achieve the depth and breadth of impact that you can unless you are becoming a multiplier, unless you are
It-
helping other people reach
yeah.
their full potential.
It might be the disease of the young, because I can remember, when I was young, I thought I had it all figured out. And, and you get older and wiser and you realize you didn't have it all
Yeah.
figured out. And the best things come together with other great people who
Hmm.
complement what you do. And
Hmm.
the best teams I've worked with in the early stage business these days are where we put together a killer team of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. People we surround ourselves with are of paramount importance in business, for whether it be from an actual mentorship standpoint or the team that is going to be building the product or
yeah,
service.
I think when we're young, we think we can do everything, right?
Yeah, I did. I learned
Yeah,
pretty quickly that that wasn't going to be a very effective way to build a business.
yeah. Sometimes you have to learn the hard way.
Exactly. Well, amazing conversation today. I really thoroughly enjoyed chatting, and I want to thank our audience for spending your time with us on the Perpetual Growth Podcast, and a big shout out to Lysle Wickersham for bringing so much value to today's conversation. Lysle, if you would, where can our listeners connect with you or learn more about what you're working on, or what's the
Yeah.
best way for them to
First,
reach?
thanks for having me, Zach. It's really been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm easily found. Not many Lyle Wickershams on LinkedIn, or you can hit me up on our website at brandthink.biz.
Excellent. Brandthink.biz. And we'll make sure that we've got that in the show notes and links so you guys all have easy access. So if this episode sparks something for you, don't keep it yourself. Share it, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review to help us reach even more people on their growth journey. And remember, growth doesn't happen by chance, it happens by choice. We'll see you guys next time.